Back in 2011, the Vancouver Canucks were on top of the hockey world, as they would finish the season claiming the President's Trophy, setting a franchise record, 54 wins, 19 losses, and 9 OT losses. However, in a dramatic Game 7 finale, the Vancouver Canucks were one game away from claiming their franchise's first Stanley Cup, will get shut down by the Boston Bruins. So it begs the question, how in the hell did the Vancouver Canucks go from being a top contender in the league, one game away from a Stanley Cup, to being the NHL's biggest dumpster fire? As they would have to trade their captain, their leading goal scorer in Bo Horvat, firing Bruce Boudreau, and becoming the most hated team in the NHL, where they have now missed the playoffs 8 times in the last decade. And to put it lightly, the Vancouver Canucks have been a disaster and have set a new standard on how not to run an NHL team. If we take a look at previous Stanley Cup champions rosters, we will get a great picture on why what's happening to the Vancouver Canucks was inevitable. This graph represents how many players were drafted by their team and played on their team during the year they won the cup. For example, the Avalanche drafted Cale Makar. He of course played on the team, so he would count as one. For the sake of this argument, I thought it would also be relevant to include entry-level contracts that were signed in free agency. For example, Vancouver signing Andrei Kuzmenko last summer would also count as one. And here are the results. The Colorado Avalanche had 11 homegrown talents on their team last season. During the Tampa Bay Lightning's back-to-back Stanley Cups, they had upwards of 15 homegrown talents playing on the roster at any given time, which is an absurdly high number. Which also explains why it is no coincidence they made 3 finals appearances in a row. An NHL team has 20 active roster spots. There were games where 75% of the lineup were drafted and or developed by Tampa. And this is the same story for the St. Louis Blues and the Capitals, as they would both have 14 homegrown talents on their roster during the season they won their cups. Whereas, if we look at the Vancouver Canucks this season, with them now trading Bo Horvat, they have 7 homegrown talents who have played on their roster. And if you consider that Podkolzin and Hoglander have been sent down, they have 5. And if you're thinking, well, 7 is only 4 less than the Avs, that's not too bad, right? The Vancouver Canucks have been quote-unquote retooling and drafting within the top 10, if not top 5, for over a decade. In fact, since their 2011 finals loss, the Vancouver Canucks have had 12 first-round picks. Of those 12 first-round picks, 6 have been in the top 10. And since their cup loss, they've now made a total of 79 draft selections. The fact that as of 2023, they have 7 homegrown talents playing on their roster is disturbing. There's a reason why Tampa Bay has had so much success. Let's look at draft picks that turned into crucial players that were selected outside the first round. Okay, pretty good, right? Now, let's take a look at what Vancouver's 67 draft picks turned into. Yep. When people talk about the draft, they focus on the top end of the draft, which, don't get me wrong, is really important, as that's usually where teams pick up that elite, if not franchise player. And in Vancouver's case, they've done a decent job at the top. However, NHL teams aren't one line. Look at last year's playoffs. Connor McDavid was playing like a prime Wayne Gretzky. To be successful, it requires depth and a full team effort from top to bottom. And when you don't draft NHL players in the later rounds, you end up with no depth, no character, and a roster that's Frankensteined from free agency signings and trades that end up being big gambles. So if you are unable to draft in the later rounds, what do? Teams look into free agency, a place where teams can pick up players without giving up any assets. However, free agency comes with the cost of overpaying. When a team drafts and develops a player who believes in the future success of the team, this usually comes with the benefit of signing a fair deal for both sides. Think about the Lightning. If they have 15 roster players who were drafted by them, and each one of those players signs a team-friendly deal, say $1 to $2 million less than their market value, that team is saving anywhere between $15 and $20 million. And I say this as an example because we have seen this in action. The Boston Bruins are the epitome of smart roster construction and team-friendly deals, which is why it is no surprise they might break a record this season for the most wins in NHL history. Whereas on the flip side, if a team doesn't draft and develop players properly, you might have to pay that extra $15 million more if you're using free agency. What if I were to tell you as of right now, the Vancouver Canucks, who have made the playoffs twice in the last decade, have less cap space than the Boston Bruins? What if I were to tell you that the Colorado Avalanche, who just won the Stanley Cup, has $5 million more in cap space? You would probably think to yourself, whoever runs that team should never have an NHL job again. And well, you would be correct. The 2016 offseason will go down in history as one of the most disastrous, straight up team destroying free agencies in the history of the game. And unfortunately, the Vancouver Canucks would also fall victim as they would sign Louis Eriksson to a 6-year, $6 million AAV deal. And what if I were to tell you that 7 years later, this signing has been the root of all Vancouver's cap issues? I mean, come on. Is it not poetic that in Louis Eriksson's first game as a Canuck, he would score an own goal?
Look out! No! Louis Eriksson has put it into his own net.
In the 2018 offseason, the Canucks would sign veterans Jay Beagle and Antoine Roussel to identical 4-year, $3 million AAV deals. The next offseason, Vancouver would sign Tyler Myers to a 5-year, $6 million AAV deal, where they would also sign Michael Furlan to a 4-year, $3.75 million AAV deal. And looking back, is Tyler Myers a $6 million player? Hell no. But if he signs just say a $4 million contract, he does not get the flack he gets today. And this is the issue. It is okay to have to slightly overpay a player or two if they are great complementary players to your roster. However, as a result of poor drafting, in Vancouver's case, if you have to overpay 5 players, all of a sudden, 5 players on your roster will now equal $10 million of overpayment. Re-signing Bo Horvat isn't even a question, it's a given. And by the time the Canucks realized they dug this hole, screw it, gigantic crater, they would then proceed to make a panic move. 5 years after the initial Louis Eriksson signing, because in his final contract year, the Vancouver Canucks would unload the cap of Eriksson, Jay Beagle, and Roussel. That's a great thing, right? No. Absolutely not. They had to give Arizona the 9th overall pick, which turned into Dylan Guenther. And in return, they would acquire Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Connor Garland. Okay, so they acquired 2 solid roster players. OEL and Garland are the epitome of being overpaid. They're not bad players, but they're overpaid, as the Canucks would fix their cap issue by sending out $12 million in cap to Arizona. But to do so, they would have to take back $12 million in cap. If Vancouver doesn't trade OEL and Garland, there is a good chance they draft Dylan Guenther and have more than enough cap space to re-sign Bo Horvat. Thus, the cycle repeats. The amount of straight up stupid, horrible decisions that have been made by the Vancouver management and ownership group is astonishing. So whether it has been the inability to draft NHL players in the later rounds, or horrible asset management and signings, the Vancouver Canucks claiming the NHL's #1 tire fire title, to me at least, is not the least bit surprising. If we take a look back at the Vancouver timeline, we can pinpoint one moment that defines their entire situation. Because back in 2015, the Vancouver Canucks would make a great decision in appointing Trevor Linden as the president of hockey operations. Trevor Linden is a Canucks legend and someone who knows hockey. Think of Linden as a potential Joe Sakic or Yzerman. However, the news would break in 2018 that the Canucks had officially cut ties with Trevor Linden. Why, you ask? Trevor Linden reportedly strongly believed that this team wasn't ready for contention and that a rebuild was required, which would lead to a bunch of arguments between Linden and owner Francesco Aquilini, which would result in Linden leaving the Canucks. If Vancouver listens to Linden back in 2018, none of this mess happens. But this is just the start. In 2015, the Canucks would appoint Jim Benning as general manager, and we never truly knew if Jim Benning was making these horrible decisions or if he was being told by the ownership group to make these horrible decisions, as he was the one who signed Louis Eriksson, signed many veteran pieces that made no sense. And the cherry on top of the entire Benning debacle, he would be the one who orchestrated the OEL trade, where he would end up being fired a week later. Who in their right mind would allow a general manager to make a trade that big if they were about to fire him? To be honest, it's mind-boggling. And as for the coaching staff, the Canucks have had so much turnover the last several years that they now have 3 coaches on payroll. And don't get me started about Boudreau. It is so frustrating that somehow all of the horrendous management mistakes would end up being put on Bruce Boudreau. The man did not deserve this treatment. Now, on the bright side, the Vancouver Canucks still have a core for the future. Elias Pettersson this season has broken out as a bona fide franchise center. Quinn Hughes on the back end is performing at a point per game pace. Thatcher Demko, when healthy, has been low-key one of the top goalies in the league. They have all the fundamental requirements when building a team. So let's hope they figure it out. And for myself as a Canucks fan's sake, and all the other distraught Canucks fans out there, let's hope management for once learned from their mistakes and they don't mess this one up. The Bo Horvat trade is the start. And before we end off this video, I have a big announcement. I'm going to be posting a lot on the RTH podcast channel. Link will be down below, and I would really appreciate it if you guys subscribe to that channel and helped me get to 1,000. I decided to kind of separate the 2 channels. I want to cover more bigger topics on this channel, such as this one, and I'm going to start pumping out content on the second channel, which will comprise of more current events, discussion, tier lists. A lot of you guys have been wanting tier lists, and of course I have zero plans to ever stop making content on this channel. I just want to make sure I'm taking the time on each one of these videos. You guys may not know it, but each one of these videos takes so much time and effort and just headaches to make. Of course I love it, but sometimes I feel like I'm rushing videos, and I want to make sure this channel has the best quality content on the platform. Hockey content, that is, I guess. So RTH podcast channel, current events, this video, bigger topics. Get the point. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and one of you so much. And as always, thanks for watching. Vancouver Canucks 2011 until 2023. Never forget.